Without further ado, Charles and Christophe.
Good morning. I hope you're having a great week at Coalesce. I'm enjoying all the talks and conference. And this morning, I'm gonna talk about how Airbyte is leveraging DBT, and I hope that you can also see how you could be leveraging both Airbyte and DBT in your own data stacks. So as Ben mentioned, I'm head of data analytics, work with a data team internally at Airbyte. And so like many of you data teams, what we do in our day-to-day is getting some data, building maybe some data as a product, close some tickets from service requests from business partners on different teams. Maybe they're asking for dashboard, reporting, etc. And so what we all have to do is go through what we call the ELT process, where we have to connect to all the tools that our organization is using, extract that data from there, moving it over to a data environment where we can work with that, clean it, model it, do some predictions, some work with it. And I assume that every data teams really want to focus on this part that is the vertical transformation, so the vertical business specifics to the organization, the metrics, that is where we're gonna build the knowledge on top of. But we don't really want to deal too much with that horizontal line of work that is very common, though, in every data team because we use common tools, we use common APIs and database. So we do this work over and over in very different teams, and that line of codes can sometimes become messy. So wouldn't it be better if we pool all that effort on the horizontal line together, and then this is where Airbyte as an open source project comes into play, because if you don't find a connector to an API that you're using, then maybe Airbyte will help you facilitate building such a connector. We provide an SDK, we call it the Connector Development Kit, so you can easily produce your own connector. We have even a low-code version of this, and then we'll maintain over time the reliability of such connectors. Maybe you can contribute that back to the community, and someday some other data team will pick it up, improve it, they'll notice that it's missing some fields, some data they need, they could contribute it back. And then we can collaboratively as a community build all those connectors together so that every data team can really focus on what matters, that vertical transformation using DBT. So in order to get there, Airbyte provides two outputs. So of course the data, for now it's transiting in a JSON format. We could change that over time. But the most important and interesting thing is that we have on the right there, we have what we call the catalog. It's a JSON schema. It's just describing all the tables, all the columns that are available in the source connectors. And we can iterate on this protocol, making it richer and richer and more useful with more metadata. So for example, we can annotate with types. We can I'm asking our engineering team to also add like documentation on the columns and more things there. From this rich catalog, what can we do? Airbyte is able to translate that catalog automatically into a DBT model that is very generic, relying a lot on macros, so that when we run DBT, thanks to all the adapters that DBT provides and work with the community already, we can translate that generic DBT model into native SQL dialects for a specific destination. And so you can see here, if you could read, like how the syntax will change depending on the destination we're working with. And what's really cool, if we had that that documentation in the catalog as well, who is the best? Like the developer that contributed the connector is pulling the data from some APIs, could definitely fill up the documentation related to a field, to a table, in the connector description itself, so that us, data team, we have a little bit less of documentation to write ourselves, and that documentation can be transmitted over in the pipeline as well. And then, of course, over time, the API is going to change, the connector will change, the schema will change as well. So DBT is already handling some schema change with these new options there. And because Airbyte transfer the data in raw format, extract, load into your warehouse, you have that flexibility of also handling whatever schema change and replay what transformation you want from that raw data. And we are also working on making this process even more robust and more flexible. So I'll pass it to Charles now to describe next.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I'm sort of going to put a capstone on what Chris was saying. He was pointing out essentially how little unique code we have to write per destination because of DBT. Essentially, we've written all of our normalization code once, and then we're able to reuse that for Snowflake, BigQuery, et cetera, with only having to do some minimal overrides with macros. And that's provided a huge amount of leverage for us. Now the question is, where is that normalization project going? Because essentially we have that first pass there, but there's a lot more to do. And I think this normalization question is particularly interesting. Like, in fact, you can go run this experiment if you want, but if you're to go ask each person at this conference, what do you expect your data to look like when it comes out of Airbyte? You would get a slightly different answer from every single person. And so that's like the heart of what's like really interesting about this problem. And so at the core for us, like the main things that we want to figure out in the short term are, one, what are the reasonable defaults there? We can't, accommodate every single person's different predilection there, but we certainly can come up with some pretty simple defaults. And so, for example, right now, if we get nested data that's sent to a destination, the default behavior in Airbyte is we'll take that nested data, let's say it's an array, and we'll take that out of the record and put it in a separate database table and connect it via a foreign key. In some cases, this is a great option. This is mentally how people are thinking about their data. And then in some cases, you have so many nested objects that makes your data unwieldy. And so giving people the option of, hey, yes, I do want my data exploded out into these different tables, or I want it kept flattened in a single table, and then down the road, maybe a little bit of something in between. The other really hard part about normalization is that, again, I think a theme you see at this conference is no matter how good you get at cleaning your data, you're always going to end up with something you didn't expect in your final destination, whether it's a type that's a little different, something that's not an enum you expected. And we really want to get to a place where we meet that reality. That's always going to be the case in ETL, and make sure that Airbyte responds to that reasonably, so that even if you have one piece of data that's not great, all of the rest of your data flows through in a way that you expect, and then the one bad piece of data sort of shunted off to the side. You know it's there and can handle that, but it doesn't block you getting value out of your data. And then finally, understanding what your data is going to look like in your data warehouse after data replication has been completed. Right now, there's a little bit of you run Airbyte and then you look at the destination, and that's how you know what the schema is going to be. But a much better world, and you see this with all of the catalogs, data catalogs that are being discussed at this conference, is being able to know before you even configure your replication, what is my data going to look like in the destination? So that's some of the stuff that we have on our roadmap for normalization going forward. So I want to switch gears, not entirely, but move a little bit away from normalization and focus a little bit more on Airbyte's integration with DBT. And so what I'm going to do today is give you all a sneak peek into a feature we'll be releasing in the next week or so that makes it super easy to trigger DBT Cloud jobs from Airbyte Cloud. And so I'm going to work through a live demo. I think the fun thing about having the people who are remote is 30 seconds later, they will know whether or not this live demo worked. So we'll find out. All right. So I'm going to prove to you that this is quite easy. So I'm going to assume that you already have a DBT Cloud account. account. All you have to do is pop into the settings of that account and create a new token. I've done this ahead of time, so I didn't have to worry about obscuring secrets during a presentation. And you plug in your DBT service token into Airbyte. After doing that, what we want to do is get to a point where every time this connection in Airbyte runs, it's going to trigger a job in DBT Cloud. And so, again, this connection we've already run. We already see that it succeeds. So we're just taking an existing connection and adding this trigger to it. And so all you have to do is hop over to the Transformations tab and add a transformation. Our documentation will explain this clearly, but basically there's two pieces of information that you need to pull out of DBT Cloud in order to get this trigger to work. First is your account ID. You're going to have to sort of take my word for it that the magic number I'm pulling out of the URL is in fact your account ID. Like I said, documentation forthcoming, and then you pull out your job ID. Plug that in. And so before I actually trigger the sync, I want to set expectations about what we expect to have happen here. So we have this existing DBT Cloud job. And so what we expect to have happen is I'm going to run the sync in Airbyte. We expect a new run to appear in this DBT Cloud job. And then in our BigQuery instance, it's expected that we already see some of this Pokemon data because this connection has been running already. So some of the data is already in BigQuery. But what we expect to have happen is that this DBT job is going to take the data that is in the data warehouse, that gets replicated into the data warehouse, and create a new table for post-processing after that. And so we should see a new table appear called Pokemon Demo. Cool. So I'm going to kick that off. This is asynchronous data replication. So while that's running, I want to sort of just drill into like, why is this exciting? One of the key values in Airbyte engineering is around focus of building leverage for our developers. And so for every project that we tackle, we sit down and we say, hey, is this a key differentiator for Airbyte? And if the answer is yes, then obviously we should be working on it. But if the answer is no, then we want to really investigate, why are we spending engineering time on this? Is there some other tool we can leverage so that we don't have to spend so much engineering time? Or can we find a managed solution that avoids us having to spend time on this? And so for us, this value on leverage is very focusing and is why this sort of segues nicely into this feature, where for us, we've set up DBT internally. We love the product. But hey, if we're in the position where DBT can worry about running DBT for us, and we just make API calls to them, that's way better. It means we don't have to spend a lot of engineering time keeping another tool up and running. And so that's sort of like the key to how Airbyte thinks about this, and so for other engineering teams or data analytics teams thinking about these things, if you think in the same way, I think this should be really exciting for you. All right, cool. I've amped long enough. The sync has succeeded, and so if we pop over to the DBT website. I'm going to refresh that. There we go. You can see that a new job was triggered 32 seconds ago and has already completed. And so if we hop over to BigQuery, again, I'm going to have to refresh the page quickly. Whoops. We see that this new table, Pokemon Demo, exists where it did not exist before. And you can sort of drill in and understand the DBT model that we were running is very simple. We were just taking data out of the data that Airbyte had replicated, and then DBT was coming in and adding a very friendly greeting to all of our DBT colleagues. And so if we go ahead and query that table, we should be able to see, again, a warm welcome from Snorlax. And so that's end-to-end all it takes to set up a DBT Cloud integration within Airbyte. I managed to do that in just a handful of minutes while talking at the same time. So definitely something that's really easy to get done. And so to sort of wrap things up, I already talked about building leverage for your team. The last two takeaways I want to leave you with both DBT and Airbyte are in this position where we have both open source and cloud versions of our product. We love open source. I think it enables all sorts of innovation and people to access tools that they wouldn't otherwise be able to access. But for some companies, maybe you're VC-backed, whatever stage you're in, it sometimes makes sense to trade money to get engineering time back. And if that's the position you're in, an Airbyte Cloud and DBT Cloud integration is exactly where you want to be, because you get something that just works and you don't have to spend any time on maintenance. And then finally, we've heard a lot about some of the things coming down the pipe for DBT Cloud. And so we're really excited to plug into that ecosystem and help power the data that's going into that as it grows over time. So really excited to be a part of that. And that's what we have. Thank you so much for enjoying our demo.